Chairman Mao. He visited Russia, and he got a little jealous. He was like, oh my goodness, we've been, is the phrase bested? We've been shown up. Russia has sent this satellite up, and here we are in China, farming rice. And so Mao, he was embarrassed. He felt outdone. He wanted China to be the leading communist nation in the world. That's what he wanted. Big aspirations. And so what Mao did, he launched this campaign, and he called it the Great Leap Forward. And the result of him leading this campaign, this industrialization, so to speak. I mean, he had the people, the farmers, he forced them to plant crops really close together so they could produce more than's ever been produced. And he had people build little iron smelters in their backyards that really couldn't produce any iron that was of any quality. And so it ended up they had to melt down their farming equipment to produce the quota that he wanted. I mean, it sounds a lot like what was going on in Egypt when Israel was in Egypt. And they took the stuff that they needed to make the bricks and said, no, you're going to have to go find it yourself now. And they're like, we can't do that. And they still demanded the same quota. And it was just brutal. Mao was brutal. And what this Great Leap Forward caused in China was a massive famine. Massive. Where supposedly around 45 million people died. That's right. 45 million people died. And that doesn't even include the millions that died during the Cultural Revolution, which is when Mao was trying to normalize socialism and remove capitalism completely from China. And he did it brutally. And the people were oppressed. The people were dying. I mean, some of these farmers, they had to give all of their product to the government and would try to hold back a little bit for their families because they were starving. And they would be beaten brutally by Mao's regime. But then in 1976, September of 1976, Mao dies. And 1 month later, he had this group of his heavies, his thugs, and it was called the Group of Four. And interestingly, his last wife was in this group, right? She was one of his heavies. And I know it's odd. And those four, when Mao died, those four were arrested for treason. And, I mean, can you imagine living through this tyranny and then within a month of each other, the leaders of this tyranny completely gone? Supposedly, when this gang of four, when they were arrested, it, quote, promoted nationwide celebration. That's expected, but I mean, that's not what you want to happen when your national leader dies, right? You want to have a national leader that's good, and that he's mourned. But it prompted nationwide celebrations, including parades in the streets of Beijing and other major cities. I mean, it was a celebration. Yes, our old dictator is dead. His regime is gone. Now, it actually didn't end quite so rapidly with his death, but that's another story. What we've seen in Romans 5 and 6 is that grace, God's grace, abounded to destroy the penalty of sin. It abounded to destroy the power of sin over us. I mean, and that merits celebration, doesn't it? A parade, I think that celebrates a parade. That there is no longer, for those who are in Christ, there is no longer any penalty for sin. And no power of sin over us. Now, it has no authority over us, yes, but it has no power to do so because we're dead to sin as we are in union with Christ. But unlike China, which didn't get much better after Mao died, grace puts believers under a new regime, under a new master, under new management, under new ownership, under a new Lord. And that is huge. We're not left without a master. We're not left without a leader, a king. You remember in the Old Testament, when we were studying the Old Testament in Judges, and it said the people did what was right in their own eyes. Why? Because there was no king. And so we were created to be ruled by a king, a good and benevolent, wise king, gracious king. And we sold ourselves into the tyrannical dictatorship of sin. Grace to deal with the penalty, not only to deal with the power, but to deliver us into the rule of a good king. Oh, how we should celebrate that. So as we look today at the rest of chapter 6, we're going to consider our grace-given new master. And it's really in 3 parts, but we're going to just look at the first part this morning. We're going to look at how Paul describes this new master, and then next week we'll look at the difference that it makes and how it came about. So today is the picture of the new master, and then next week will be the difference that it makes and how it happened. So I was trying to think of how do you title something like this, and I think under new ownership is probably the best way to title it because we've been bought with a price. We belong to Jesus. And so we're not left out there wandering around aimlessly without leadership. We've been given to a new master. So let's look at Romans chapter 6, verses 15. And we'll read a little bit here. Romans chapter 6, verse 15. What then? Are we to sin because we are not under law but under grace? Now remember back. Remember in verse 1 he says, should we keep on sinning because grace abounds? He says, no way. We're dead to it. Now he says, should we keep on sinning because we're not under law but under grace? By no means. Remember, no way, Jose. Do you not know that if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one whom you obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or of obedience, which leads to righteousness. But thanks be to God that you who were once slaves of sin have become obedient from the heart to the standard of teaching to which you were committed, and having been set free from sin, have become slaves of righteousness. I'm speaking in human terms. In other words, he's using this slavery illustration, all right? I'm speaking in human terms because of your natural limitations. For just as you once presented your members, the parts of your bodies, as slaves to impurity and to lawlessness, leading to more lawlessness, so now present your members as slaves to righteousness, leading to sanctification. When you were slaves of sin, you were free in regard to righteousness. But what fruit were you getting at that time from the things of which you are now ashamed? The end of those things is death. But now that you have been set free from sin and have become slaves of God, the fruit you get leads to sanctification and its end, eternal life. For the wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. Will you pray with me? Father, we come to you this morning like Paul did, saying, "Thanks be to you." We were slaves of sin, helpless and hopeless, under its control, under its power, under its rule. And Jesus came and destroyed the work of the enemy. He came and took the punishment that we deserved. He died to the power of sin, and we, in union with Him, are now under new ownership. Father, I pray this morning that if we have been living, maybe not thinking so much that, oh, it's okay to sin, but living like it is, living tolerant of residual sin in our lives, that sin that so easily entangles our feet, that's hard to get rid of, that habitual sin. Father, that we won't be okay with that because we serve You, a righteous God, a gracious God, a God who speaks to us. And so, God, this morning, we come before You needing help. We come before You because our sin nature, it still responds to temptation. And we need, Lord, Your leadership, Your enabling, Your holiness and righteousness. Empower us to live holy lives to Your glory. Father, every hour we need You. You are such a good Master, such an amazing Lord. You are our King. And so we don't want to do what's good in our eyes. We desire to do what's good in Yours. So show us this morning what is good in Your eyes, that we might do it by the enabling of Your Spirit that lives in us. In Jesus' name, amen. So let's look at our new Master. In 6, 1-14, that first part of the chapter, I just want to reiterate, Paul said we can't keep sinning because Christ has died to sin, and so we too, in union with Him, have died to sin. We're dead to it. It's something that's already happened. Remember I said it's a radical change. We have been changed hugely. We were alive to sin. We responded to it. Now we're dead. That was the first 14 verses. Now, Paul addresses the question, can we be okay with sporadic residual sin since we're not under the law? I mean, in 14 he had just said, for sin will have no dominion over you, no power over you, no authority over you, since you're not under law but under grace. And he says, okay, we're not under the law. So no longer are we under the law. And we'll talk about what that means. But he's addressing this anticipated question. Well, if we're not under the law, can we just do what we want? Can we allow those sins that are so hard to get rid of? Now, there's a difference when he says in verse 1, he says, shall we continue in sin? That's a present tense, and that means just regular, continual sin. Is that the lifestyle we can live? No, we can't. Now he changes the tense, and he changes it to what's called the aorist tense when he says, can we sin? And it's more of a snapshot. These sins, it's not consistent. He said, okay, we know that we can't continually sin, but what about just like once in a while sin? Can we be okay with those once in a while sins that they're so hard to get rid of. They're those habitual things in our life that we just really struggle with. Should we just be okay with those since we're not under the law, right? We're not under the law. And he answers, we cannot be okay with those continued, sporadic, residual sin, because we have not merely been freed from being servants of the law, we have been placed into the service of another, into the service of Christ. In other words, his main answer here is, why can we not have any sin? Now, let me just say, are we going to attain perfection in this life? Let's say that just from the start. No. All right? We are being sanctified. We need, and if you are a person who is really sensitive, you have a conscience that is very tender, and it's easy for you to feel guilty, and sometimes you feel guilty over things that are not sinful, then I want to be careful here. All right? We need to give ourselves room to grow, but we need to give ourselves only the room that Christ gives us to grow. Okay, the grace He provides for us. But now I think the problem of most of us is not being too hard on ourselves, but too easy on ourselves. And Paul says, I know you're not under the law anymore, but you are still under Christ. And that means we've got to grow in holiness. The answer is freedom from the law is not freedom from all expectations, okay? Our new way of life that Paul references, he references in verse 4, talks about that we might walk in newness of life. And then he also speaks about it later on in 7. We walk in this new life by the Spirit. This new life that we live is one under the lordship of Jesus Christ. We are never under no management. We are never under no ownership. We are never autonomous. Never absolutely free or self-determining. We don't call the shots ever. Only God is absolutely free. In Psalm 115:3, it says, "Our God is in the heavens. He does whatever He pleases." It's true. But that is a characteristic of God. We are never self-determining. Martin Luther says it this way. He illustrates it. He says, the human will is like a horse between two riders, God and the devil. Our will, our want to, our volition, it is the horse. It is led, it is controlled, it is ruled, led, guided, whatever, by either the enemy or by God Himself. So we, the horse, never get to choose where we want to go. It's either a slave to Christ or a slave to the devil. Only God is absolutely free. If you want to have a quote for today, one of the quotes could be, we will be a slave to something. We will be a slave to something. We will be ruled by something. Thomas Chalmers has a book, an old book, and in it he says this. He says, nature abhors a vacuum, right? If you have a little something vacuum in it and you open it, air rushes in, right? It won't stay a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. Such, at least, is the nature of the heart. You see, the heart can change what it wants. The heart can change what it is ruled by, but it can't stop being ruled by something. Can't stop wanting something. True freedom, then, is not a matter of having no master. That's Paul's answer. He said, just because the law is not your master doesn't mean you have no master in Christ. Christ is your new master. True freedom is not having no master, it is having the right master. Matthew 8:5-10 is the story of that centurion whose daughter was ill and dying. And he came to Jesus and he said, heal my daughter. And Jesus said, okay. And he said, you don't need to come, just say the word. He says, because I'm a man under authority. I get what that means to be under authority. And what he was saying was, Jesus, you have all authority. And that's why Jesus responded to the centurion, wow, this guy's got more faith than I've seen in all Israel. Because the centurion was saying, I recognize who the master is. And it's Jesus Christ. So there are only two masters, two managers, certainly not equals. But the point being, there is no third option. It is sin or it is Christ. Romans 6:18 speaks of being set free from the one and having become a slave to the other. It's one or the other. So if Paul's main point here is that grace abounds to place us under a new master, how does he go about saying it? How does he paint this picture? With what colors does he paint this picture of our new master? So let's look at a few of these portraits. He gives a few portraits here. The first portrait that he gives us is this law and grace. He paints our new master in the color of grace. He says, you are no longer under, this is in 14, verse 14, you are no longer, and 15, you are no longer under the law. That was our old master. No longer under the authority of that master. No longer under the authority of him. Now you're under grace. That is how he characterizes our new master, is grace. In other words, Warren Wiersbe put it this way. To be under law means we must do something for God. We're the doers. But to be under grace means that God has done something for us. That's the nature of our new master. He doesn't come to us and say, do this or you die. He says, trust that I have done this so you can live. It is grace. What an amazing thing. Think of Mao. Think of the difference between the leadership that Mao gave, the oppressive, brutal leadership, and the leadership was certainly better, all right? Think of some nation where the leader has been so horrible, and then they get a leader that does right, that is just and fair and true, and how awesome that is. And that doesn't even compare. Our old master, the law, was brutal, and our new master, now I'm not saying the law was bad, I'm saying it was condemning, all right? Our new master says, you can't. I did. And I'm coming to you with grace. This is the good news that we can't do, but God has done. And I think this is one of the simplest ways, church, that we can share the gospel with our one. We can go to them and say, look, what are you trusting to make you acceptable to a holy God? And these two ways, either they trust the law, they're under it, or they're trusting grace, they're under it. Either they're trusting what they do to make God pleased, or they're trusting what Christ has done to make God pleased. It's a very simple way to help them understand the difference from being under this old master of the law that they can't live up to. They can't fulfill the law perfectly. But under Christ. Under Christ, Christ has done it. And so that is, I think, one of the easiest ways to explain the gospel to someone is to say, oh, it's not law, it's grace. It's not what you do, it's what Christ has done. I hope that's helpful as you have opportunities to share with them, to help them understand what Christ means. So he says, under law versus being under the new master who is characterized by grace. Second painting. We were under still the painting of law and grace. Let's talk about what it means to be under the law, right? Certainly what we do. That's being under the law. Second thing of the law. The law stirs up sin. Now, the law is good. We'll get to that weeks to come. But the law, in connection with the sin nature, all right? The law is the power of sin, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15:56. It is the power of sin. How is it the power of sin? Well, when the law says, don't do this, the sin nature in us says, well, if it says don't, it must be fun. And when the law says, do that, the sin nature says, you can't tell me what to do, right? With a little neck thing, right? You can't tell me what to do. That's the power of sin. The law, the commands of God, the sin nature in us reacts against them. And in Romans 5:20 it says when the law is proclaimed, sin increases. In Romans 7:5 it says the sinful passions are aroused by the law. The sin nature kicks at the law's commands. And so apart from grace, we are under the sinful nature's response to the law's commands. How miserable that is. That when the law is proclaimed, the sin nature can only resist it and desire to resist it. But we're not under the law. We're not under the power of sin. We're under grace. And under grace, the law's demands have been fulfilled by Christ. And so, the heart that had rebelled against the law's demands is now moved by God's kindness. It's like in marriage. I always go through pre-marriage stuff and I talk about how to change your spouse. Anybody here want to change your spouse? Don't raise your hand. Okay? But the way to change your spouse is not nagging. That won't do it, because nagging is equivalent to the law. And the sin nature responds to the law and to nagging the same way. You can't tell me what to do. So the way we change our spouse is to bend grace, to respond better than they deserve when they leave their dirty clothes on the floor, to pick them up for them and say, I love you, honey, I'll get these. And that produces in them such a thankfulness in their heart. They're like, I want to do what pleases them. You see how it changes the heart. We're not under the law, we're under grace. In the New Testament, 1 Corinthians 10:23 says, everything is lawful, but not everything is beneficial. See, that's everything is lawful. The law has been fulfilled. Doesn't mean everything's good for us. Not everything is wise for us to do. But there is no legal boundary that causes my sin nature to want to step over it. There is no legal line in the sand that makes my sin nature want to go, I can cross, right? Instead, there is only Christ's open arms for me to run into in holiness. He says, come to me and I will accept you. I will cleanse you. I will wash you. Just come to me. So we're not under the law, we're under grace. Another aspect of being under the law, being under the law's tutelage. All right? You know what a tutor is? The Old Testament, the old way of understanding the word tutor, we get it from Galatians 3:24 and 25. The law was our tutor until Christ came. That word, tutor, it described the servant that would care for a child, take them to school, make sure they were eating. They took care of a child until that child was old enough to take care of themselves. All right? Until they were of age. The law points us to righteousness as our tutor, but it offers no help in achieving it. It says, here's what you can do, here are the boundaries, here, you do this, do that, but it gives no help in achieving it. But under grace, the law's tutelage is replaced with the Holy Spirit's leading us into all truth. That's exciting. I need someone to lead me. I don't want to be just left hanging Just because I'm not under the law, so what do I do now? Lord, tell me. Okay, I'm putting my Spirit in you. And that Spirit will lead you into all truth. And so we were under the tutelage of the law, but now we're under the teaching of the Holy Spirit. Another expression of the law is that it was given, and this is hard to express, but it was given in a sense to protect us from sin. Galatians 3:19, the law was added because of transgression. Okay? Had we not been sinning, we wouldn't have needed the law. 1 Timothy 1:9, the law is not made for a righteous person, but for sinners. That's what the law is for. The law provides needed barriers for right relationship with God and people. That's what the law does. Needed barriers. In other words, it helps to keep us from sin when we are doing a very lousy job ourselves. That the grace of the law. I know that might be confusing, but it was a gift. It was a good thing. But we have a better thing. Under grace, the law's static boundary was replaced with the Spirit's dynamic conviction. With the Spirit's, in every situation, speaking and tugging and working on the conscience for holiness. And so, thank God we are under the protection of the Holy Spirit. I think that does also, if we were to follow that out, it has to do with our assurance, our perseverance, because we have the Spirit constantly with us. Just a couple more things here on the law. Under the law's testimony. We were under the case. There is testimony, right? Witnesses. The law came as a witness to testify about us. And what did it say? Its testimony was, you can't keep me. You can't. You can't keep me enough to be viewed as righteous by a holy God. That was under the law, the testimony of the law. But you realize now we're under the testimony of grace. And the testimony of grace says this. Jesus declares, I kept the law for you. That's the testimony of grace. You don't have to be righteous. I kept it for you. And then finally, we are under the law's condemnation. We deserve punishment. The sentence is clear. The law says you're guilty. You've not loved God well. You've not loved people well. You're guilty. But we are not under the law. We are under grace. And it says, as in Romans 8:1, there is now no what? Condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. We are not under law, church. We are under a new master, and he is described as grace, favor, kindness. He does what's necessary as a man. Isn't that crazy? I mean, wouldn't you like to go to work and have a boss that said, you have to do nothing today? I did it all. Done. It is finished, right? Enjoy, right? All right, that's one part of our of being under the mastery of the Lord Jesus Christ. A second aspect is that we go from being slaves of sin to being entrusted to gospel teaching. And that's what it says in verse 17. But thanks be to God that you were once slaves of sin. You have become obedient from the heart to the standard of teaching to which you were committed, to which you were entrusted, to which you were given. We have been given to this teaching. What teaching? A gospel teaching. A teaching that says in Ephesians 2:10, you've been saved to do good works, but not saved by good works. That's the foundation of gospel teaching. Then it goes, Paul then goes on, for example, in Romans 13, he says, let's walk properly, not in orgies and drunkenness, not at sex, not sensuality, not in quarreling, not in jealousy. He gives this gospel ethic. And it's a more stringent ethic than the law. The law can only say, here's what your behavior is. The ethic of the gospel says, your heart matters. And so we have been entrusted. This word entrusted or given to, I very quickly want you to notice what it says, how Paul has used this. Paul uses it in Romans 1 when he says, God gives the wicked over to their own sinful natures, right? Romans 1:24. He gives them to it. That's what has been said here. Now, to the righteous, God gives us to righteous teaching. He gives us to it, entrusts us to it. And praise God, we've been taken from sin and given over to the holy teaching of God's Spirit. And, like those Chinese celebrated in the street when Mao fell, Paul stops mid-paragraph here, and he just starts worshiping. Praise be to God that we were slaves of this vicious dictator sin, but we have been made servants of the Most High God. What an amazing thing. This morning I was reading in Exodus 12. And in Exodus 12, it's the institution of the Passover. And we're having the Lord's Supper, which is based on the Passover. It's not the final fulfillment. The Lord's Supper is not the final fulfillment of Passover, because I think the final wedding feast is the final fulfillment. But this is the reminder here and now that of what the Passover reminded them of. What did the Passover remind them of? It reminded them that God had delivered them from where? Egypt. Delivered from the old master. You see that? And delivered unto the new, the gracious master. And so, this morning, we're going to take the Lord's Supper as a mid-paragraph celebration. Thanks be to God. Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me. And in the Old Testament, the Israelites did the Passover in remembrance that God had delivered them by means of the blood of the Passover lamb from the oppressive slavery to Egypt. And this morning, we're going to celebrate. It's interesting, by the way, in Exodus 12, the middle of the chapter, it says, after the last plague had been done and they were going to be freed, it says they worshiped. And so as they worshiped at being freed from slavery to Egypt this morning, we're going to remember Jesus Christ, the Passover lamb, who was sacrificed so that we could be purchased from slavery to sin and be under new ownership, Jesus Christ. That's why we're going to celebrate this morning. That's why we're going to observe this. It's not some rote thing we do. It's not some means of being saved. For we have been saved by grace. This is a reminder. This is an expression of worship that Jesus Christ, by His shed blood, we have been delivered from sin. And so, let's remember this. Let's remember this, that we have a new master. Let me ask this morning, who's your master? If you're a believer, I want to remind you, and if this is your takeaway, sin is not your master. It's not. I mean, it's just the way it is. It's just, it isn't. If you're a believer, it isn't your master. That's an exciting thing. But also remember who your master is. You're not your master either. The Lord Jesus Christ is. But if you have never trusted Christ to be your righteousness, sin is still your master. And you need to come to Christ and say, I need your grace. I need what Christ did. I want to trust that, not what I can do.